And see the pause.
Yes. So
Okay. Hi.
pause.
Welcome to Ducks in a Row. We're doing a live and also we're recording this on Zoom. So thank you for being here with us. I'm going to introduce myself and everybody else right now. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here to our first Ducks in a Row. And we have quite an evening ahead of us. I'll just do a quick introduction. I am Tracy Sprower. I'm the education manager at Met How at Home. And this event is a big collaborative effort from the Met How Valley Advanced Care Planning Group. And we've been meeting for quite a while. We have representatives from the Lookout Coalition. Raise your hand. And room one, Stephanie. Sheila from Okanagan Palliative Care. Karen, if Karen's still here. There's Karen. Jocelyn over here is Tony Cabina and Marisa. And Kathy Merwin made the soup. Thanks so much, everybody. Yeah, there's always a lot of work that goes into something like this. But thank you all for coming and being here. This kind of planning, it's easier to do when we're in community, when we can hear from other people, maybe what other people are experiencing or have experienced. We can learn from each other, and we're going to learn from our local people who are here to help us get our ducks in a row. So this is, as you know, this is the legal planning, financial planning session, and you're going to be hearing from Maria and Jeff from Met How Net. We're going to hear from Wheatland Bank representatives, and also Susan Donahue is going to talk to us about trusts and wills and all kinds of fun things like that. So thank you so much. We also are recording this session, and so hopefully that's okay with you. There were a lot of folks who weren't able to be here, and so it's going to be helpful to have this recorded. And we'd also, is there anybody here that would take offense to having your photo taken? Okay, good. Another thing, I'm wondering if we could get a show of hands. It's really helpful for us to know how you heard about our event, what motivated you to register. So please raise your hand if you registered for this event after you heard us on KTRT on the radio. 1, 2. How about from the article in the Met How Valley News? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you, Met How Valley News. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. Or from a friend, word of mouth. 1 from Met How at Home. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, thank you so much. That's really helpful for us just to get a sense of what outreach is working well, because it's really important to us to get the word out. Again, help yourself to the sparkly waters. We're tucked in here. If something did happen, we're going to all file out those back sliding doors. Selena is going to help you with that. And there are 2 bathrooms going in either direction out here. And if you need any follow-up after this session, feel free to reach out to us, to Met How at Home. We can get your questions where they need to go. And there's also a big table of resources out front as well. So thanks you guys for being here on the YouTube channel. And without further ado, yeah, and we're going to hold our questions until the end. Sheila.
There's also paper. If they have questions, they can write them down.
put their name on it, and we can call them with their contact.
Yes. Does anybody out here need a piece of paper before we get rolling? I think we're good. Okay,
I need
thanks.
some water.
Oh, yes. We'll get you guys water, sparkly or regular. Okay, thanks so much. All right, thank you.
Well, one of the things we had talked about on the way here was that questions are a part of our presentation because we want to be able to respond to some of the concerns you have and get specifically what you've come here to find out today. In particular, though, I think that what we want.
Is anybody having difficulty hearing? Because we do have a microphone.
Turn it off.
Okay,
We can speak
I will.
loud.
I will project.
Okay.
It's okay. I think I can do this. Yeah. At any rate, so much of what you might be concerned about when it comes to cybersecurity, and as you think about potentially losing your faculties and maybe not being able to do the things you at one time were able to do online or to take care of, so much of what you do to take care of yourself today is online. It's a bank account, it's a bill you pay, it's how you talk to your family, it's so many things. And that involves a lot of passwords, a lot of things to remember. If you are the only one who knows those things, it could mark trouble for you down the road. And that's, I think, what we want to talk about today, is how you can prepare for that and the kinds of things that are really important for you to document and the practices you might consider putting into place now so that the person who helps you or helps pick up the pieces later is able to do that productively. So I think we should start with talking about passwords.
Okay, yeah, so Maria and I run MetaNet, you probably heard that, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces here and some new ones. I've been living in the Meta Valley most of my life, and the Meta Valley place is a great place to live because, you know, you can be in your house, most of us don't lock our doors, it's a pretty safe place generally. But in the 22 years we've been running the internet service, we realized that you could be sitting at home comfortably and yet not be perfectly safe, you know, because you're at a computer and it's the whole world can come in through that computer. So one of the things we're going to talk about is also security. But to talk about passwords first, we have to probably maintain somewhere in the order of about 2,000 passwords on our system. And of course, that is a big project and it has to be done securely. And so we just have different methods, and they're probably quite a bit more complicated than the methods you might need to do to keep your passwords. Just having a book with things written down so that if somebody needed to, I always think, what if I'm not here? You know, there's so much in my head that I need to have some way for anybody, if I'm not able to be there, to, and especially Maria, because she would have to find all this stuff if I weren't here, to access that. So it's pretty important to have one place that everybody knows about. Here's where this stuff's at, and you know, keep those safe. Passwords it's a whole world, and there's a lot of different ways you can deal with passwords. There are programs you can get that would manage all of your passwords for all your different accounts. Just want to get a sense from people. If you just had to guess how many passwords you have to remember in your daily life, what would you say would be an average number?
6.
6? Okay.
100.
100. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you manage 200 passwords?
I put them in a book.
Okay, yes, yeah, and you got that book locked away somewhere. It's not under your computer, your keyboard. Yeah.
The way I do it is there's a thing, if you go on Amazon or anything like that, most of the time they're called the vault. It's a little gadget about this big.
Yes.
It's not connected to anything computer-wise. You know, it's a standalone device. You can't get to it Bluetooth or anything.
Mhm.
And you just put it in there and you change it and all that.
And how difficult was that to set up?
It's not,
Yeah,
I mean, I can do it, so.
yeah,
most People here probably could.
yeah. And so if you weren't here, then you have somebody who would know how to get to that and get into that.
Yeah, you just need a password to get into it. So
Right. Yeah.
That's it.
Sandra?
Well, I'm wondering why the passwords shouldn't be next to the computer.
Well, it's a good question because again, we live in the Methow here. We're not in, a apartment building in St. Petersburg. So, it's fairly safe. And frankly, there's got to be at least a couple of them in my, somewhere in my pile of papers there, close to my desk. But, the obvious reason is that somebody can easily see a password and maybe know how to get into something. Now that when you have 100 passwords, how do you know which one goes with what? There's some things you can do that sort of guard where that password is. And oftentimes, one thing we do at Medicine Wheel is we'll have a password that you can say. It's like a moniker, right? It's something you can just say, but it's not just that. It's mixed up. It's got different numbers. It's a completely different thing. But we can say it real quick. So if we have to, because we often have to share a password with somebody else in the office, we'll say, oh yeah, it's that one. And you can either say that and everybody knows what that translates to in their head.
It's a common phrase, particularly.
Yeah, it's basically a common phrase that we've mixed up in a way that everybody knows because they've repeated it so many times. So, Selena?
Well, I do something similar, whereas I have a common phrase that I use for all my passwords with special characters and numbers.
Yes.
And then I tag the account that it's for, so that I don't have to carry a list around because I know my method.
Mhm.
When I'm trying to get into a certain account, I know there's always a way that I've tagged the account with my special phrase.
I see. Good. Yeah. We were having a little debate today as whether it's better to have randomized passwords with uppercase, lowercase numbers and all that sort, or just 4 words together, just spelled out all lowercase. Both of these methods probably are about equal. And the best password crackers, it would take them about 150 years to decrypt those. But if you have your password written down, you might give them a hint or give them a head start if they already know some of the characters or all of the characters in it and can just run through.
But I think what Sandra's referring to is somebody has to be at your computer. And how likely is that? Is that your point, really?
That's
It's,
part of my point, and part of my point is I have to look at those passwords all day, every day. And
Yes.
so I don't want to have to be jumping up and down to go find the book. Like,
Yeah.
In my case, a file box.
Right. And as long as your office environment's secure, nobody else is going to be in there, checking that out or anything, then probably that's fine. Yeah, I would say not a problem.
I think that's actually, for living in the Methow, I think we're pretty safe. It's unusual for any of us to have someone come into our home that we don't know. But again, as we age, I think that's something we do have to think about protecting ourselves from. Because somebody might, I don't know, I think we are all vulnerable to fall for a story or somebody who appears to be helpful to us and we don't understand that they're not. So it makes sense to have at least one layer of security there. It's not just under the keyboard or on Post-it, perhaps in a book that just is, 3 shelves down.
Tucked away somewhere.
Or it's a Jane Eyre title or something, It's a Jane Eyre title,
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, but and then everybody knows that, you don't want to have, like your grandkid's name, with the 1 after it or something like that. Like I said, we have probably thousands of passwords when we consider all our customers' passwords. And once in a while they'll tell me, well, what's your password? And they say it's monkey. And I said, oh, no, don't do that. Word out of the dictionary, bad idea. They could just run through the dictionary in 20 seconds and, find it. So, always want to mix things up as much as you can. And it's kind of fun and a clever thing to do to come up with a code or a system for your passwords that, make it a clever, thing, a way to get at it. So anyway, that's one thing we were gonna.
And keep in mind, the vulnerability isn't just from somebody looking at your password, but there are a lot of computers out there in the world. We're talking AI now, that are constantly trying to bash away to figure out a password to get into all kinds of devices around the world. Yes.
What do you guys think about the 1Password? So everything in that is very bizarre, all kinds of upper, lower numbers and things, but it's one thing that you get to, but is there any chance of that not functioning at some point and then we're out of luck because we have all those weird things?
So
in
you're
there?
saying that you use the same password for
No,
more than one?
it's a thing called 1Password.
Oh, I'm sorry, right.
It's a
Yeah.
vault.
So it's online?
Online vault.
It's online.
In the
Uh-huh.
I personally I know there are a lot of people who say those are fine, but personally, I would rather have it in my control.
Mhm.
Yeah, but the current wisdom is that those are pretty good, a pretty good way to do it, because we have so many passwords to keep track of, that it can be relatively impossible to remember them all at the same time. So, unless you have a book that's secure, it really is a pretty good way to do it, as long as you can remember that password.
Yeah.
And they must have some systems for, hey, I completely forgot my password, I need to get it. So then you have a list of questions, and they think of all the possibilities.
Okay.
I think so. It's pretty good, but we have ours right there. I don't know, we're just paranoid that way. Some other company out there,
And of course, the other vulnerability is becoming a victim of, some scam or a phishing effort, through your email or on your phone. Your niece just recently.
Yeah, I have a niece who works for Microsoft. She's worked her way up through the ranks and is actually quite up high in Microsoft now, has a team. And she would not be somebody you would expect to fall to some sort of a scam. And my brother told me a couple weeks ago that she got an email that said her bank, that she was overdrawn on her account. And it's on her phone. And she said, oh, geez, I don't know how I can deal with that. So she immediately got on the phone and started, saying, okay, I'll fix this or whatever. I don't know if she made the call or just emailed.
Somebody called her.
That was it, yeah. And somebody called her, and she went about 3 steps down the path to cleaning out that bank account before she said, oh, wait a minute, I'm hanging up right now and gonna figure this out. It's a pretty common thing. We will get calls once in a while from somebody who says, something came up on my computer, said it was compromised, freaked me out. I said, okay, well, what do I got to do to fix it? Well, you need to download this program, and then we'll get in there and do that. Well, bad idea. That's a very common way for people to get into your computer and start looking around for things that are important for them, and probably to you too. So we always, even at Medicine Wheel, our fingers will hover over the button. It'll get that close to saying, yeah, I want to see this thing. It's an attachment. It's a link in a email, something like that. They use social engineering. There's 2 kind of components to it. One is that usually the thing that's coming at you is something that's scary. The IRS is going to shut you down. You've been accused of a crime. Things that might immediately get you into the fight or flight mode. And so that's one element. The other one is that you need to take immediate action on this. And we're going to give you just the way to do that. And the immediate action is to click on something, an attachment, or a link in the email. Always, 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 we say no. Even if it's from our very best friend, my spouse, whoever it is, I stop there and I call my spouse and I say, did you just send me something that you want me to click on? It's a quick way to check. Often it's from a bank, so just, okay, I'm done with, my computer. I'm going to call my bank on the regular old phone and say, did you guys just send me something? Is there a problem? And often there's no problem. It's just somebody has figured out a way to do this. And they're getting more clever all the time because, as Maria said, AI is now a part of the game. We've always had AI. AI was Google at one time, But now that the game has gotten to where it's starting to learn, it's teaching itself basically in a lot of ways, and being fed information and then extrapolating from that information to become smarter, I guess you might say. So the scams are getting more clever. Yes.
Do you recommend or not any like third-party companies? We just sort of upgraded in a vast security program. It seems pretty good to me.
Yes.
It has a number of things that it looks for,
Yeah.
and
No.
you can scan your disk and all that.
I think that's great. I think the regular security packages, like 3 of them, McAfee, and and those are really good. Sometimes they can cause you problems because sometimes they get overzealous. But I would rather be overzealous and cause a little problem to deal with rather than just being more vulnerable. Probably the biggest thing in all of this is having an operating system that's updated all the time and recent. We all. In the sense, we're all depression era kids, right? We want to keep that computer going forever. We paid for it. We want it to last. And so we're, just hesitant to throw something away that seems to be working. But in the area of computers, it's really important to have a later operating system. These operating systems go out of date and they're not secure anymore. So if you've got a Windows 7 machine at home, or God forbid, a 95 machine, you want to get rid of that and upgrade.
Just about 3 weeks ago, we took an emergency trip over to Spokane, buying a new Mac computer. The old one was 13 years old. We brought it over there to be upgraded, and the geniuses over there sort of blew their mind, and they kept it overnight, and they figured it out, and they were able to transfer.
But at first they said,
Too
old.
Right.
too
can't
old.
do it.
Yeah. And, these aren't like washing machines, the last 40 years, computers, the security situation for a computer is much more serious than a washing machine. And so, they have to keep upgrading the software. It's really a game of spy versus spy, right? The bad guys faces the good guys, right? And they, the good guys figure out how to secure something, the bad guys figure out how to exploit that. And it's just back and forth and back and forth. And so part of that is that the hardware itself becomes vulnerable over time. And so you can't, upgrade it anymore to make it right. So that's probably number one, is making sure your computer is up to date and supported by the company that made it, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or whoever. And then the second one is just securing that with good passwords. I like to turn my computer off at night, because if you're connected to the internet, you got a good connection from us, then, that's always connected to the internet, and things can happen at night that you don't know. So I like to turn mine off at night so that doesn't happen. And then good
Likewise, when you have, this is another thing to document along with those passwords, is what your operating system is, when you got it, how often you run your updates. Are those happening, once a week? What's it set for? Are you laughing? I mean, the more you can document about what your procedures are, I lose track of mine. And I think it's ridiculous, because I should be just write down when I've updated it. It's
So a quick follow-up to something you just said, Jeff, about turning your computer off. Is there a whole difference between putting it on sleep mode and turning it all the way off?
No, not really. I think both are doing what I was suggesting, which is to kind of secure your computer at night. Should it be connected and trying to do something at night.
Okay.
One thing about turning a computer off is there's what's called random access memory in there that keeps things, so they're ready to go when you want to use them and stuff. And the only way to really clear your RAM completely is to turn the computer off.
Okay.
So I don't like to run computers continuously for weeks and weeks, because little errors kind of develop in the computer, and also little viruses can get generated in there. And when you turn them off, you're clearing that, and so you're kind of going back to the start again. So for that reason, I like
Good advice, thank you.
You see anything
the other thing you have. I'm sorry.
about VPNs?
Oh, right. The other thing I was going to say about just the security of your computer is that not only are the updates important, but you have to, you also have to, we have a firewall. In most people in their homes have a router, and that acts as a firewall. And if that's wireless, it needs to be protected with a good password. Because people can get into your computer if they figure out the password, or if it's just not, if they get around the firewall. And I've had people, we have had people we knew who gave their password to somebody who borrowed their phone. They got their password off their phone, they got into their wireless router, and they got onto their computer for mischief. So, you know, it's the one of the nice things about a smaller network like ours is that you don't have a lot of the big bad guys coming at us all the time. Our firewalls are pretty good, but it's just that last defense for you before somebody gets into your computer is, especially if you're plugged in. So I'll caution that as well. And you, I'm sorry, Tony, you said
Do you want to
VPN?
say about that?
Yeah,
Do they know what it is?
right. A virtual private network. So some people recommend that you use that as a rule. It's not easy to set up, but it maybe you could speak more to that, the technical part of that.
Yeah, you know, we use, if we're communicating with an office or something, you know, there's ways to basically encrypt your signal going out and in and coming into your computer. It's called virtual private network. So you're basically creating a network to your network. And it's a tunnel, they call it, that goes between, and so you're not out there necessarily unencrypted in the big bad internet. You're just, you know, kind of in this little tunnel that's secure. For home use, you know, the one home users use it to get around our security measures. You know, we have things, a firewall on our system that protects against certain things. One of them is using BitTorrent, which often is used to download movies illegally and that sort of things. That happens on our network. Then we get messages from the big studios saying, you know, you're stealing. So some people get around those measures that we put on by having a virtual private network out in the world. Another use is, you know, in 4 countries, they will use VPNs to get around measures that, say, their government is using to prevent you from getting out to the bigger internet as well. There may be, if you're in office situations, I think VPNs, are you thinking of a situation where a home user might want to use a VPN that I'm not considering here?
Well, I every time I go to a bank or a
Yes.
credit card
Yes.
company about my account, I go on a VPN first.
Okay, that's good.
And
Yeah,
according to that, I live in Vancouver, British Columbia,
right.
but I don't.
Right.
But that's what it looks like.
And also
That's
your
pretty
tunnel is
sophisticated.
encrypted all the way there
Right.
and back. Now, I will say that if you're going to a bank site, you want to make sure it has HTTPS on there. That also means that you're dealing with an encryption with a public and private key to communicate with that site. If something's wrong with that key, your browser will tell you with a little triangle or something and saying there's a problem with this site. And if that's a banking site, if it's it's something that doesn't matter, you're not putting information into, it's not as big a deal. But if it's a bank or something where you're entering information, you do always want to make sure that you have that HTTPS on there, and that's a secure connection. So yeah, good
Yep.
point. Yeah.
I always call the bank, you know, if I have a question.
Yes.
If it's something that came, I go, hello.
Yeah.
I call.
The banks are very helpful. They
Yeah.
want you not to have trouble like the
Right.
things we've been talking about here. Was there a question
Yeah,
here?
we've got about 2 minutes and then,
Okay.
if you have any closing
Any
thoughts.
questions?
Okay,
Um,
yeah. If we have questions, we are going to hang around and be here for a panel at the end, I guess. So if you have questions that we haven't answered here, we'll be happy to answer those. And of course, any of you can call the office and ask those questions as well. So anyway, it's nice to see you all here. I think this is a really good venue for getting started with dealing with, I think what's, you know, can be a big problem, you know, cybersecurity and all that sort of stuff. So this is great. This is a good start and gives us a lot of information.
We're also looking forward to seeing the Digital Navigator program develop more and become a little more sophisticated. It seems to me like we should have somebody we can call and get answers from and some guidance rather readily. And I know that there are funds out there to do that. It just takes a little organization and trying to figure out how to find the person we can place who can be responsive to all of our questions, and maybe even potentially do house calls and help people stay updated and keep a healthy computer environment and learn how to document their secure passwords and such.
If you are a Meadow at Home member, we do have volunteers trained in the digital navigator program and that are proficient with technology, and you can put in a service request.
Great.
Nice.
And have them find your device.
Mhm.
That's perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, that's huge.
Okay, well, we'll
Alright, thank
clear
you.
the stage.
Saving brokerage accounts, which have their own beneficiary designation. So I always tell my clients to go check your checking accounts and your brokerage accounts and see who you designated as the beneficiary when you first signed them up, because people forget what they did, and maybe it's not somebody that they should be the person that they want designated. So your gross estate is both of those kinds of things together, probate assets and non-probate assets. Okay. Probate is a legal process to transfer your gross estate to your heirs and beneficiaries. Your personal representative, the executor, takes your will through probate. Okay. Probate is not necessary if your gross estate is less than $100,000 and you do not own any real property. So that's the exception. Some people are kind of afraid of probate. They want to, but I think it's maybe because they come from California, because in California, probate is very expensive. In Washington, it's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple procedure. You need a lawyer to help you, but it's not that hard. If you have a will, your personal representative distributes your estate as set forth in your will. Okay. If you do not have a will, your estate goes to your heirs at law. Your heirs at law are your spouse, I should have put that in there, your children, your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, and cousins. Someone must come forward to file a probate for your estate, and the court appoints the personal representative. And there's a whole little generational tree as to where it goes first, but I didn't put that in here, too complicated. Okay, the purposes of the statutory requirement regulating the execution of wills are to ensure that the testator has a definite and complete intention to dispose of his or her property and to prevent, as far as possible, fraud, perjury, mistake, and the chance of one instrument being substituted for another. That's the entire purpose of a will. So here's the validity of wills. And there's some specific statutory requirements for a will to be valid. First of all, it has to be in writing. Secondly, it must be signed by the testator or some other person under his direction in his presence. Then it has to have an attestation clause by the two or more competent witnesses to validate the will. A witness is defined as someone who has personal knowledge that the will was signed by the testator, and you have to sign the will in the presence of your testators. And I've seen cases where somebody was outside in the hall when the person signed the will. It's not valid. You have to watch them. So it's kind of a ceremony when you sign a will. Attestation is the witness's act of signing with the intent to give legal effect to the will and constitutes a certificate that the signature was genuine. And that's just part of the document. So the witness must sign at the direction or request of the testator. The witness must sign in the testator's presence. I already said that. So competency, the two witnesses must be competent, meaning that the witnesses must be legally qualified to testify in court to the same facts as those attested to when signing the will. So you have to be 18 years of age or older to be competent. You have to be in sound mind to be competent to witness a will. An interested witness is one who would receive a gift under the will, which creates a rebuttable presumption that the witness procured the gift by duress, menace, fraud, or undue influence. So anybody who's getting anything in the will can't be a witness to the will. Yes?
Couple questions here. So someone, if they were a witness if the will was signed out of state or somewhere else, and the witness literally would have to be brought to Okanagan County then to,
Only under certain circumstances, and I'm gonna show you something about how we prevent that from happening,
okay,
okay?
all right.
So let's see, so might be the next slide. Although there's no statutory requirement for an attestation clause to be included in the will, an attestation clause provides evidence of the will's due execution. Okay, now the next one. This is the sample. I guess the short answer to your question is we create self-proving wills so that the witnesses sign an affidavit at the end of the will that gives the information that needs to go to court if you don't have that self-proving clause. We'll come to that in a second. But first, go back. This is what the witnesses sign as their testimony. The foregoing instrument, consisting of how many typewritten pages, of which this is the last, was on the date thereof signed and published by testator, who appeared to be of sound and disposing mind and memory, and was by him, her, declared to be his, her last will and testament, in the presence of us, who at his, her request, and in his, her presence, and in the presence of each other, have hereunto set our hands as witnesses thereto, and you put the date. So that's part of the witness's testimony. Okay, there's no statutory requirement that the testator state to the witnesses that the document is in fact his or her will, but it's advisable that some statement of the document's nature be made at the time of attestation. It's kind of so this is the self-proving part I was talking about. Washington law provides that the witness may execute an affidavit stating the facts to which the witness would be required to testify in court to provide the validity of the will. So if there's no self-proving aspect to the will, then you're right, to make the will acceptable to the court, you'd have to find the witnesses and get them to testify, create a declaration about the conditions of the signing of the will. So we always do, the self-proving thing. So do the next one, and I think that's the sample. The undersigned, competent to testify, being duly sworn, each for himself or herself testifies as follows. The instrument to which this is attached, which purports to be the last will and testament, and then you have the name, was signed and executed by said testator at, and then you have the town, in the presence of myself and the other witness on the date it bears. The testator then and thereupon published the instrument as and declared it to be his or her last will and testament, and requested us to sign the same as witnesses. At the request and in the presence of each other, the other witness and I subscribed our names as witnesses thereto. At the time of executing said instrument, the testator and each witness were of legal age, and the testator was of sound and disposing mind and memory, and not acting under duress, menace, fraud, undue influence, or misrepresentation, as I verily believe. And those are the things the witness would have to testify to at court if you didn't have this paragraph, this affidavit that they signed that's part of your will. Okay, it's called a self-proving will. Every will must satisfy the formalities set out in Washington law, but it also must have been executed with testamentary intent. That is, the testator must have intended the document to represent his or her last will and testament. If a will was executed with all the formalities, but under compulsion, undue influence, as part of a ceremonial for the purpose of a deception, or for the purpose of perpetuating a jest, it is not a valid will. Very rare. I haven't ever come across that, but you just have to kind of get it in your head, what the requirements of a will are, and what kind of ceremonious things you have to do to create a will, a valid will. So there's gifts in a will. There's 4 kinds: special, general, demonstrative, and residuary. Okay, special gifts. A specific gift is a bequest of a specific article of the testator's estate, as for example, a particular horse, a piece of jewelry, or money in a certain purse or chest, a particular stock in the public funds, a particular bond or other instrument for the payment of money. So you can put special gifts into your will like that, and then go to the next one. The general gift is a gift of amounts of or percentages rather than of things or pieces of property that are specially described and identified, like a certain percentage of my brokerage account, for example. You could put that in there. And I prefer percentage rather than dollar amounts, because when you create your will, the dollar amount signifies in your mind a certain percentage of what you think your gross estate is. But 20 years from now, your gross estate might diminish or it might really expand, and that dollar amount would not represent that percentage that you thought of when you first created it. So put percentages rather than dollar amounts, unless it's just a small amount. Okay, demonstrative gifts, this is very rare, I don't do this really. But it's possible. Demonstrative gifts are somewhat rare, but are bequests of sums of money or of quantity or amounts having a pecuniary value and measure, not in themselves specific, but made payable primarily out of a particular designated fund or piece of property belonging or assumed to belong to the testator. Okay, and the next one is
I don't understand that.
well, in a second, I'm gonna give some examples, but that's, like you'd say, I wanna give $1,000 out of my, Charles Schwab account. That's a general gift. I'll show you some examples in a second. So residuary gifts is one that covers the rest or remainder of the testator's property after all specific general and demonstrative gifts and after the payment of state debts, taxes, and expenses. And so there's a phrase in the will, I give the remainder and the residue of my estate to, and that's really the big portion of your gifting. Okay, here's examples. Specific gift, my 1970 Cadillac, a general gift, $1,000. Demonstrative gift, $1,000 taken from my credit union account if available. Residuary gift, everything else I own, which can be given in percentages to individuals and or institutions. Yes.
Does all this have to go to probate?
Yes, if we're gonna come to that in a second, but just to preview, as I said, if your estate is only worth $100,000 and you don't own any personal property, then it doesn't have to go through probate. Your family or whoever the personal representative is in your will can just follow the instructions of your will. Yes.
Is there a need to have the signatures notarized?
To have the witnesses notarized
Witnesses.
on the self-proving affidavit, by a notary, but the witness is a witness to the signature of the testator. So it's just,
I didn't understand.
well, the testator signs the will and the witnesses attest that they saw him or her
Right.
sign it. And then there's that self-proving thing where that affidavit, and when the witnesses sign that affidavit, their signatures have to be notarized for that portion of the will.
But the notarization is not required for that original, the testator's signature.
No, it's not, but it's all one document, so,
Okay.
yeah, so it just all kind of comes together that way.
How often should a will be revisited?
Well, when you think your circumstances have changed, if your spouse dies, if one of your children dies, if you adopt a child,
I understand.
yeah, that's all, and you can change it anytime, or you have some special gifts, all of a sudden you say, no, my jewelry collection, I really want to give it to my niece. And so it's not in your will that way, so then you,
And if you find later, my mother died and she left a will. And then we found out later in her files, here's our handwritten articles that were designated to go to certain people. And I took that to our lawyer and he says, we have to account for that too.
Yeah.
That's legal.
we're gonna get to that in a minute. The statute allows you to leave a list. So you can, in your handwriting, you can write down, give my, pearl necklace to my niece, or name the niece. And you can make that list and put it with your will, and it has the same force and effect as your will. So you don't have to do special gifts, because special gifts are in your will, which makes them more substantial, I guess, because you don't have to remember to make the list. But you can also, it's harder to change because you have to change your will if you want to change a special gift. But if you have a tangible personal property on a list, you can change that anytime.
It doesn't have to have a witness.
No, it's just your signature and a date. It has to be handwritten or typed out and your date. But put it with your will because it goes with the will.
What about details in the will, for instance, addresses, and residences
Mhm.
and that type of thing, if they've changed from a will that you developed 15 years ago and they need to be corrected, how do you correct that without writing
A
an
new
entire
will.
new will?
Well, different lawyers would approach that differently. When I put somebody's name in a will, I say the town where they live. And that's the town where they lived on the date that the will was signed. So a person could trace them, and find them. They lived in Bothell, in 1999. Well, where do they live now? They have your name and where they live in that year. Because you don't want to keep changing your will for changes of address. I think that's kind of expensive and cumbersome. So, okay, so community property. A deceased spouse may dispose of only one half of the community property together with any separate property that spouse owns by will. So the other one half of the community property is confirmed to the surviving spouse. So in your will, you can bequeath your half of the community property to anybody you want, but your spouse is going to maintain ownership of the other half. So that can, that's just how it can be done. But normally the surviving spouse owns one half, and the predeceasing spouse, their half goes to the surviving spouse, and then the surviving spouse owns all of it outright. Okay, so the entire community estate, however, is subject to probate, administration, and the payment of obligations and debts of the community. So that's a little aspect of it. The surviving spouse is generally entitled to be the personal representative of the community property. Okay. This is restrictions on gifts. Prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. Spouses may agree to a limitation on the right of each of them to inherit or otherwise succeed to the property of the other. Prenuptial agreements have strict requirements of full disclosure and consultation by each party with his or her own attorney. I've done prenuptial agreements. You just have to have an attorney for each party, and each party has to fully disclose their financial situation to the other one, and then you write up a document that explains how they want to keep control over some of it themselves rather than have it turn into community property. They can say, I want this always to be my separate property. And if both parties sign it, then that's how it's going to be. A common postnuptial agreement is a community property agreement, a CPA, which is a contract between the spouses that clarifies which property is separate and which is community. A CPA takes precedence over a will if there are conflicting statements between the two documents. I do CPAs pretty regularly because sometimes people have community property and separate property, and they want to make it really clear which is community and which is separate. And here's the thing about community property. When you get married, any property that you bring to the marriage is presumed to be separate, but it can commingle with the community property so that it kind of turns in over time to community property. Any property the couple acquires during their marriage is presumed to be community. It's a presumption that can be challenged in court, but that's how it starts. Okay, no contest clauses. A no contest clause revokes that gift of any beneficiary who contests the will. The contesting beneficiary then receives nothing or some token amount. However, a contest brought with probable cause will not result in a forfeiture of the legacy. A contest brought by someone acting on the advice of an attorney will be deemed to be brought with probable cause, but only if all material facts have been fully and fairly laid before the attorney prior to advising in favor of the contest. I've never done a will contest. Thank God. Okay. Restrictions that violate public policy are not allowed. Any restraint on marriage or inducement for married persons to separate or divorce is void, as against public policy which favors marriage and marital harmony. So you can't say, I'll give this to my son if he divorces his wife, because I don't like her. He only gets it if he divorces her. You don't do that. Conditions precedent. A condition precedent can mean any condition that takes effect, if at all, at the death of the testator, or may also refer to any condition that must occur before the estate or a particular gift can vest in the beneficiary, whether at or after the testator's death. So I've had this happen when, for example, I had a client whose aunt was going to leave him $3 million, let's say. And he had to leave it to somebody, and he had a son, but his son was a drug addict. And so he wanted to have a condition precedent in his will saying that his son could only receive it if he could show by the statements of doctors that he had been clean and sober for 3 years. So that was the condition for him to get his inheritance. So go back a little bit, there's one more. If the court finds that the testator intended to make the performance of some act or the existence of some fact at the time of the testator's death to be a condition precedent to the beneficiary taking into the will, the court will enforce that condition. Okay, condition subsequent. A condition subsequent takes effect on some happening after the death of the testator or takes effect to revoke or divest a gift after it has already vested. Oh, typo, vested in the beneficiary. So, that would be something like, after my son receives this money, if he later becomes a drug addict, then, and that's affirmed by 3 medical doctors, then he has to forfeit what's left of his beneficiary, of his gift. Okay, so testamentary trust. We're going to get into trust now. A will can contain a trust within the will document, and they're very useful, and I do those pretty regularly for various reasons. So a testamentary trust is a legal arrangement that provides for the ownership, management, and distribution of property. A testamentary trust is established in accordance with the instructions contained in the last will and testament. A testamentary trust goes into effect upon the death of the trustor. So we'll get some examples. Who are the parties to a trust? Any trust has these 3 parties: the grantor or the trustor, who creates the trust in his or her name and contributes the money to the trust, the trustee who manages the trust under the terms set forth in the will, and the beneficiary or beneficiaries who receive the assets of the trust. Those 3 roles. It can be the same person, though.
The difference between a trustee and a personal representative is that a trustee is only involved if there is a trust embedded in the will.
That's right. Or outside of the will, there could be a
Or outside.
trustee. Yeah, that's right. And so the personal representative and the trustee could be the same person, but they have to work together because the personal representative has to help the trustee set up the trust, basically. Okay. Purposes of testamentary trust is created to manage the assets of the deceased on behalf of the beneficiaries. It may also be used as a way of reducing estate tax liabilities. That's a very good way.
We've got a couple minutes left.
Okay, we'll try. Examples of purposes of a testamentary trust. A child under the 18 cannot be a beneficiary of a gift given in a will, but a testamentary trust created in the will may direct, for example, that the decedent's assets may be accessed by a child for educational purposes until the child reaches the age of 25, at which time the balance will be paid. So that's one reason for a testamentary trust, a common reason, because you want to leave it to your grandchildren, but they're not 18. So you create a testamentary trust and make their parent, one of their parents, the trustee, and you give instructions about when the grandchild can have the money. A testamentary trust may also be created to manage the charitable distribution of assets in accordance with the wishes of the deceased. So, you can say which charitable organizations you want to get things from your will, from your estate. A testamentary trust may be created to give a pet to a trusted friend, and the pet trust may also provide funds for future costs associated with owning the pet. And I've done those. People want to make sure their pet is taken care of. So they create a pet trust in their will. A testamentary trust may be a special needs trust to transfer assets to a person who must qualify for disability benefits and therefore cannot hold assets in his or her own name. This is a very important aspect of a trust because to get Medicaid benefits, a person can only have $2,500 in their name. But if you create a special needs trust, either inside a will or outside, you put that person's assets in the trust, and you have to create it so they have no control over it ever. But the person who's the trustee can use the money for their benefit, to go on vacations, to do, whatever that for that person needs. So that's a very important and handy trust. Okay, let's see next. A testament trust is irrevocable. The terms set forth in the will cannot be changed. However, it's revocable in your lifetime, because you can change your will during your lifetime if you have a testamentary trust. But as soon as you die, it becomes irrevocable, and you can't change it. Once the will goes through probate to determine its authenticity, the trust goes into effect and the personal representative transfers the estate, property into the testamentary trust. Once a testamentary trust is in place, the trustee manages the assets until the trust expires and the beneficiaries receives control of the assets. The trust expiration date is usually tied to a specific event set forth in the will.
And you've got about 1 minute
Okay,
left.
let's
if there's
see.
anything to wrap up.
Well, I'm just gonna go through until you tell me to stop.
Okay.
A spendthrift provision attempts to protect the trust assets, income or principal, against the possibility of their being transferred by or subject to the debts of the beneficiary. So support trusts direct the trustee to pay to the beneficiary only as much of the trust income as is necessary for the beneficiary's maintenance or support. You can do that so that a person maybe who doesn't handle money very well, the trustee can give them things they need for their maintenance and support. Okay, any will should contain the following clauses. Let's skip through this. Maybe not, I don't know. Then I was going to go through a whole bunch of stuff about trusts, but the testamentary trust is very similar to, go to the next one. There's revocable trusts and irrevocable trusts, and these are called inter vivos trusts because they are you set them up during your lifetime. And there's different reasons to maybe create a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust, those three people and those three roles, the trustee, the grantor, and the beneficiary, you cannot be any of those three. You have to have very different people be the trustee, the grantor. Well, you're the grantor, but somebody else has to be the trustee and somebody else has to be the beneficiary. But for a revocable trust, you can be all of those things. So you have control of revocable trusts. But, okay, so I guess that's probably a minute.
Yeah. So we're gonna take just about a 5-minute break if you need to stretch or grab some food or use the restroom, and then we'll hear from Leland May.
But as I said, I will be happy to send you this because there's more things about trusts further on that we didn't get to. So I'll be happy to send it to you.
You just send it to that right phone and we'll send it out to you registered through our home portal.
Okay.
Really great.
Take home, it's at the desk right there, not only for you, but for your heirs of what to do when someone passes away. And we've got some really helpful information in here and phone numbers for retirement benefits and for the credit bureaus too. It's always a good idea to let them know when somebody has passed away. So all that information is in here, it's step-by-step guide. There again at the end of the table that you can take home. So the main thing we wanted to present is the issues that we've had when people pass away. A lot of times people don't realize that a power of attorney ceases at death. So people will come in with a power of attorney after someone is passed away, thinking that they can just take over the account when that happens, and it does not. So we have to send them back to either get a letter of testamentary or, look for a letter of testamentary, as Susan talked about. So we were really happy that we were after her because you would need to start with an attorney. We can't give legal
I don't
advice.
think I mentioned that.
Okay, yeah.
But it's what you get when you go through probate. Your personal
Yes.
representative gets this authorization to deal with all the property of the decedent.
Yes, exactly. And it's all spelled out in the information that we prepared as well. And our other issue is safe deposit box keys. If someone has a safe deposit box, they come in thinking that we have extra keys and we don't. So you're going to need to know where your keys are and you're gonna need to let somebody else know where your keys are. Because if someone comes in and the box needs to be opened, there's no keys, we have to contact a locksmith to get the box drilled, and that's very expensive. And that cost goes on to the individual that needs to have that box opened.
And along that line, who can access the box? So are you the only person who is a signer on that box? If so, then we can't appoint beneficiaries that are payable on death to a safe deposit box. You would need to go through probate, and there would be an executor, a personal representative, and that's the individual who could access the box. So another thing to think about.
And the main thing to think about when you're setting up your accounts, or to review after you set up your accounts, you can always change those, is the account ownership. Are they sole owner accounts with just you? Are they joint owners with you and either your spouse or one of your children? And have you assigned a payable on death beneficiary on your accounts? Or have you established a formal trust like Susan was talking about? And one thing to consider with the payable on death beneficiary is they need to be of legal age. You don't want to assign a 2-year-old to be payable on death on your account, because then it's going to be their guardian who's actually going to have benefit of the funds or ownership of the funds. So, and if you have established a formal trust, we will need to know that if you wanted to set up the accounts under the formal trust. And we would need the entire copy of the trust, because it does mention the successor trustees and how the trust is supposed to be administered. So you want to be sure that you've got all of these things set in place and that you let us know. Sometimes people set up the trust, they don't let us know, and then the trustee comes in to administer the account, and maybe it's a single owner account that has made a payable on death beneficiary. So that would counteract your trust. So some things to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing, is conflicting information. So if you've set up a trust, oftentimes a lot of folks stop there. They set up the trust and then they think that's done. Make sure that you let your bank know, because it doesn't happen automatically. We do need that full trust. We need to structure the account under the trust. Is it under a separate tax ID number, or is it under your social? Who are the parties who are the trustees? Those are the only individuals who can be on the trust as long as they're living. So those are all important things to share with your bank if your accounts should be set up that way. Same thing with the beneficiaries. If you have designated PODs, as we call them, pay on deaths, then does that conflict with your trust information? And in the world of banking, that having a single party or a jointly owned account, not set up under a trust, so basically the way that it boils down is that the individuals who are on the account have the ownership primarily, and then secondary, so if those individuals are deceased, then it will go down to the beneficiaries that are named on your signature card, on your account agreement. That would trump any other documents that you have set up with an estate or anything else that you didn't have set up with the bank. So yeah, it's important to consider that. If I were to name Teresa, my beneficiary on my account, but my husband was not on that account, and then he later went to file for an estate, Teresa would get the funds in this account before he would. So just to set an example there. So it's good to keep those things in mind.
And just to review your accounts as well, sometimes you can assign a payable on death beneficiary, and then something happens to that person, they die before you. So you're going to need to keep that up to date as well, because that can cause some problems as well if both parties are deceased. So,
and a common question with that we get all the time is if you have kids or grandkids who you'd like to appoint as your beneficiary, but they live out of state, they can't come in and sign, I don't have all their information. Different banks treat things differently, so I'll only speak to Wheatland Bank, but we don't need their signature. We only need your signature, the account owner's signatures, and we just need their name and either their date of birth or their social security number. So that's all we need to add someone as a beneficiary. And we revise that account agreement and have you sign it. So yeah, that's usually a fear, is that, oh, my grandkids or my kids, they live in Minnesota, they can't sign to be on my account. They don't have to.
So basically, that's our presentation. Most of the information is here for you to take home. And like I say, keep it with your will or keep it with your important documents, because it does help your heirs to know about how to go about contacting the bank after you pass away.
question.
Mhm.
So can you have multiple beneficiaries?
Yes.
And how are the portions of the accounts distributed in that case?
It's split out equally. So if you had 3 beneficiaries, it'd be 33, 33, 33.
Couldn't you designate it 50 for this one and 25 and 25 or something?
At this point, Wheatland does equal beneficiaries. There's no portioning.
So there's no law in the state of Washington that controls the signature issue in that? It's just up to the bank, individual corporation, if you will?
The Glacier Bancorp has decided, and it may be because Glacier is in Montana, that it's equal beneficiaries.
That's what I just was
Yeah.
wondering.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yes.
Clarification on
Uh-huh.
safety deposit box
Mhm.
keys. I don't know why that is, there's probably a million other things that should be keeping me up at night, but that one. How do they get in the box? So are you saying your bank policy is my personal representative or my executrix doesn't need to be a signatory on my bank agreement for that safety deposit box? It would just default to them because they are named in my will as my executrix.
As long as we have the letter of testamentary assigning them.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. But they would have to have a key too in order to get in. Or we have to drill the box.
Right.
Yeah.
The physical access of the box
Yes.
is usually.
I've got handled it. Could they still get in with the key? Okay, so you would need that in your file.
Correct. Yes, exactly. Yes.
What happens to a single owner account if there's no beneficiary?
If there's no beneficiary and no one comes forward with a letter of testamentary, after 3 to 5 years, it would be escheated to the state of Washington as a dormant account.
Can I also add that?
3 to 5 years.
It would go to the estate and it would go according to the will.
If someone came forward
If
with that.
someone came forward, if
Exactly.
someone, the personal representative came
Yes.
forward and said, I think there's an account here, and you say that there's no beneficiary, then it would go to the estate. And it would go according to the, and the money in that account would be distributed according to the will, the residuary clause.
Yes, if someone came forward, but if they don't come forward, it does go to the state of Washington.
And I did have the Department of Revenue contact me to do an estate when there was money in the accounts and no heirs and no will. So.
That brings up a good point too. Oftentimes, folks want to set a beneficiary on their account as kind of a surprise to their child or grandchild or loved one. Something to consider with that, and I won't advise you in any way to, who to notify of these things, but I would suggest that you may notify someone that exists. Hey, I have this account at Wheatland Bank. I named this person, whether it's that person you're telling or someone else, or if you're leaving it in writing in your will or something, to notify that person, because we would need to be approached. So yes, people need to come forward with the estate documents or claiming that I believe I'm the beneficiary on this person's account. Here's my ID, can I close that account? Banks don't actively reach out to those beneficiaries. So it's something to keep in mind, within that time frame before it gets escheated to the state of Washington, so that those beneficiaries are aware that they're beneficiaries on that account.
Could you clarify a comment made a short while ago about bank beneficiary instructions trumping a will or probate or estate?
Yes, if you have named someone as a beneficiary on your account, but you've named someone else as a beneficiary in your will, The bank is going to take that actual signature card because it is an account agreement, a legal document that states that person gets the funds in that particular account. So
Those are
things to
Those are
consider.
non-probate
Mhm.
assets. I was talking about probate, non-probate. Those are non-probate assets, so they just go directly to the beneficiaries because you have your own laws and statutes about how that functions.
Yes. Good question.
Yeah.
Yes.
With a safe deposit box where there are annual fees to maintain that box, so if those fees aren't paid, how long does that, what's your procedure if there's a safe deposit box that the fees have not been paid?
It's the same as an account, 3 to 5 years. If it goes dormant, then we actually will drill the box. If no one comes forward, we can't get a hold of someone. And then those contents are sent to the state of Washington.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, the things that are cheated to the state of Washington goes to the school fund.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Good to know.
All right,
Good
that's
stuff.
the end of our presentation unless anyone has any questions.
We can invite up Susan and Jeff and Maria. So if you have any questions for any of them, now's the time.
I just want to say it's great to have a local bank. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
there are some
Thank you.
communities that don't, we
Uh-huh.
shouldn't take it for granted.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Anything we should know about switching the switch over to Wheatland that we don't already know?
Well, your accounts with North Cascades were already with Glacier Bancorp. It's just that Wheatland has been acquired by Glacier and they put us together because we're in the same market and Wheatland had more branches than we did, so we get to take their name. But nothing for you being with North
Okay.
Cascades would change.
Okay.
Yeah, account numbers,
Yeah, all that seems to be the same
everything's the
for
same.
us.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I just want to remind you of the story.
Well, you're supposed to be up here too.
I've got somebody in the queue.
And I asked the question of Maria if she feels comfortable about us using the password keychain that's on our Apple devices. And she suggested that that might not be a good idea, especially if it's going into the cloud. And I mentioned that I didn't know until yesterday that my husband did not use the keychain and I use the keychain all the time. So check with your spouse. You might be surprised.
Yeah, the communication about what your practices are is really important. That's what we're talking about here.
What's the keychain?
It's specific to Apple. It's just a way of saving passwords.
Okay.
And I don't actually have a problem with it. It's just not something I would particularly do. And, but more important out of that conversation was tell your spouse what your practices are. Talk about this stuff, you know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the latest on the internet being available on the electric co-op?
Oh, we are in the process of transitioning to OCEC. We expect that to take place this summer. We're working hard to dot our I's and cross our T's. In the meantime, we are moving forward with the $12 million grant we were awarded to put fiber into quite a bit of the membership area, about 1,400 homes, I believe.
Is there a map available that shows where this is gonna occur?
Generally, a lot of it will be fine-tuned in the engineering process, which is happening now. And once that happens, there will be a map available for that. Ultimately, it is the goal of OCEC and MetDownNet to get it to every one of the members and potentially.
Because I can get electricity, I can't get the internet.
Right, yeah. It's a promise to get both.
Okay.
I have a question, oh, sorry.
Well,
I'd like, this is for you and Jeff, Maria, but going back to what you were talking about, storing passwords and what may happen as our faculties diminish. Do you have advice on how to communicate or make sure that somebody knows, similar to the safe deposit box key conundrum? What are the best practices for making sure that somebody else can find those passwords if they need them?
Well, and when you say that, Sandra, I am horrified to have to admit that I don't practice them myself. And I need to as well. I mean, there are just too many passwords that live in my head because I say, I'll just do that tomorrow. And there's, in addition to having Jeff know where the passwords are kept, he's much better at this than I am. I know where his are. But, we have younger people in our lives that we trust, children. They need to know. I had sent a copy of our wills to the daughters. They should have a copy of our passwords, really. And yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you. I'm guilty myself, but there. Yes.
What's your feeling about the need to change passwords frequently?
Personally, we do that in our system, but not. Personally, I don't do that very often.
She's doing a great job.
I don't cross I'm very separate about my passwords. So a bank gets one thing and not two banks don't get the same password. And I'm just very careful that they're not the same kinds of institutions that are shared passwords. And I vary them a lot. And I just, that feels like it's more secure in some ways than changing them often. But what would you say about that?
Yeah, I'm good. I had the same password for 20 years. And then recently, April Wertz, who works for us, has been the security expert. And she's been changing a lot of things password-wise. We've replaced passwords on all our routers, for example. And probably, hundreds of passwords that she's changed in the last 2 months. And we think it's very important to change up. That thing it's out there. People figure out parts of it, it's just changing it just kind of changes. It sets it to 0 and people have to start over again, try to figure out what the password is.
But that's a network though. If it's on your own computer and you're not sending it out in the world in any way, shape or form, you turn your computer off and you're protected by a firewall, do you think there's still a need to change it?
No, of course, that's much more.
We should talk about this.
Yeah.
Does that depend on how often you use your password also?
I think so, and also if, the whole saving feature, we were talking about that earlier, about where you save your password when all these different devices and formats offer to save it for you, and it's like, well, do I want to save it to Google? I feel like, but Jeff was pointing out that if it's saved in your computer, and not up in the cloud, you're covered, especially if you turn your computer off. Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, saving your computer, of course, if you, fall into one of these scams or whatever, one of the things they're combing for is that password on your computer. So, so that not saving it on your computer is an extra layer of security. All this is about layers of security, right? And, they get first 2, but then they can't get to the next 3. You're in good shape. But depending on how you feel about your sense of security, you want to have as many layers as possible. That's just another layer is changing your password at home. It's not typically a very hard thing to do. Just say, okay, well, I'm going to go to this one now. And for me, I kind of have levels. Like banking is like the top level, and then they go lower and lower down. That's to log in your home computer that always stays in your office. So, so I have this, sort of top level computer, top tier, I should say, where my most secure passwords are. And then, I'll kind of think about the rest of them. You say my email account and my home computers as lower down.
I also like verification, 2 verification steps.
Yeah, that's
those,
always
at
good.
first I was like, oh God, this is such a pain in the neck. I don't want to, but those are great. It's great. So you get the phone verification, the text verification, or email verification or even have them call you. And that's-
How good are those verifications? Because I always, on the really important ones, I always get a text on my phone.
That's very secure, yeah.
It's very secure.
Yeah, that's like adding 3 layers to your,
Okay.
whatever layers you have. So, yeah, very good.
I had a question about finding an attorney. I haven't started yet, so how do you find an attorney, or do you just go online and do an online will, or?
Well, it can be someone you know, like maybe, for example, me. And I have my cards out there, but there's other attorneys in the valley, and you should find an attorney that you feel comfortable with. That's the most important thing.
Is it a certain qualification?
Well, you just ask them, do you do probates, do you do wills, do you do trusts? And, attorneys have a ethical obligation to be competent in their area, where they offer legal services. And so, they can't just do it out of the blue. They have to know how to do it. So that's.
They hold the will then?
No, well, different lawyers do things differently. I give the original will and I stamp it original, because I had a client once who took the original will and started making changes on it, and that invalidates it totally. So I stamp it with a big blue original, and I give it to my client, and I give them a copy, or maybe 3 or 4 copies, however much they want. And I keep a copy, and I tell them that I keep the copies for at least, I keep the copies of wills and trusts in my storage unit near my office. And I tell them that I'll keep that for as long as I live. And after that, they've got to find their will on their own.
That's a good retention policy.
We had his name, and he retired.
Yeah.
So before he retired, he gave us all this paper,
Uh-huh.
and he says, it's no longer in my computer, here.
Yeah, okay, well, see, different lawyers do different things. I keep it in my storage thing, and then because if you can't produce the original will to the court for probate, then you can produce the copy, but then you have to give an affidavit from the lawyer that this is the same as the original, and you have to go through a bunch of steps. So, you have to keep your original will in a secure place. And I give a sheet of paper, how to take care of your will. And I also give a sheet of paper, information on the event of my death. And it has things like where the safety deposit keys are. And it's just handy information, like what your account numbers are and stuff like that. And I don't put all that stuff in the will, but I have this other sheet of paper that you put with your will. And so, that's how I do it. Other people might do it differently. I know you can also submit your will to the will, what's it called, up in the courthouse, the repository. You can put it in the will repository. But I don't really have people who've done that.
We've done it.
Good, okay,
The
good.
trouble is, you gotta, to access it, somebody has to know it's actually there.
That's exactly right. So there's a little pros and cons of almost everything. Yes.
My question is about trusts versus wills.
Mhm.
So I have a will, my husband and I have a will in place, and a family member has recommended that we also have a trust.
Mm-hmm.
And the main reason is to avoid probate.
Yeah.
And is that a reasonable reason?
Well, I don't know. I don't think probate's all that scary. But there is a big reason about taxes to have a trust. And that is if your gross estate is more than 2.193 million, the state will tax your estate on the first million after that at 10%. So if your estate is worth $100,000 more than 2.193, the state's going to take 10,000. And that, to me, that's a little cutoff point, because it doesn't cost $10,000 to set up a trust. And that $10,000 is going to be taken away from your heirs. So you kind of balance that out a little bit. And there's just different reasons for a trust. And, you can talk to an attorney about what reasons you might have. But avoiding probate, I don't think is a very strong reason, because when you have an inter vivos trust, a revocable or an irrevocable trust that you create during your lifetime, well, the revocable trust becomes irrevocable on your death. And you lost my thought. You need to have what's called a pour over will. So you also need a will, but it's very simple, and it just says, everything goes according to my trust. And you name the trust and the date that it was signed. And that's all you do for probate for that. You assign a personal representative. Sometimes, I mean, I had a case like this where the problem with a trust is you might forget, you have to title everything in the name of the trust. It's a big headache and, no fun. So, and that takes money and it takes attention to detail. And you might forget to put something in your trust. So then the pour over will says everything that goes according to my trust, but the rest, residue and remainder of my estate. And then it's just like a regular will, goes to these beneficiaries. So that's one.
What did you call it, a pour over?
Pour over will, because the will just says, pours it over. It says everything in my estate goes according to this trust. And the thing is, you don't have to file a trust in court, but you do have to file a will in court, and that names your beneficiaries. So that's why sometimes people want to protect their privacy by not having to file their will in court. But a pour over will doesn't say who the beneficiaries are. It just says, it just goes according to the trust. And then the trust document names the beneficiaries, and it's a private document. That's a good question. Thank you. We didn't get to that part, but it's on the rest of the slideshow if you want to look at that.
Thank you.
Have I heard something about you have to do that within, 5 years or 10 years before the person dies, that it goes into the trust? Is that?
There is, if you are doing a trust, a trust to take money out of the estate of somebody who is going to be disabled and needs to have Medicaid, and you don't want to use up all that person's assets to pay Jamie's place or whatever. There's a 5-year look back, it's called. So you have to put money into their trust and wait 5 years before Medicaid will say that you don't have those assets. And if it's 4 years, then they'll make you pay for 1 year until, privately until the 5-year look back is completed.
There's a question over there.
Yeah.
I just think maybe that's a topic that would be really good to talk a little bit more about, because I think a lot of people don't know about Medicaid reimbursement.
Yeah. I'm not particularly,
everyone does.
maybe, I'm not particularly a Medicaid specialist. I just kind of deal with it as I have clients who say, this person has too much money. And I've done some, I can't think of the name of them, support trusts. Someone who is completely disabled, they can't function at all, but they had a lot of money because they inherited it from their mother. And so they had to take that money and put it into special needs trust, thank you, to a special needs trust so that they wouldn't have to spend that money for the medical care. And then the trustee of the special needs trust, as I said before, can spend it on anything for that person's health maintenance and support. So
Tracy, maybe we could have that as a future agenda topic.
Yeah.
That would be good. That would be really
We will
good.
be having someone from Avian Adult Care coming to talk about long-term care and
Yeah.
Medicaid.
Next week?
Next week.
Oh.
Yeah.
Be sure to sign up.
That's great.
Actually, if you're not already signed up, there is a wait list.
Oh.
We have to do it another
Wait
time.
list does get utilized, so.
Yeah, that would be good because, there's much more to it than what I'm saying right now. Yeah.
So there are, free will forms online and things
Yeah.
like that. And when would that be okay to go that route? And when would it be better?
I
to
would
do
say
it person?
never. Because I've seen those and they are just not really very clean, because they spit out all this language that doesn't really need to be there. And they do them according to what state you're in and all that. But it's not that hard to go to a lawyer and do a simple will. A simple will is pretty easy. It's just if you have a lot of money or you have to do different things, different kind of trusts, then it gets a little more expensive. But I did want to tell you one thing. I had a client once who, after we were done, she sent me a note, and it said, "Thank you, Susan, it was almost fun." That was, I'll just never forget that. Yes,
I have a burning question.
okay, great.
I'm hearing that you set up an account at a bank, you designate a beneficiary in the moment that maybe that's not your high priority. You then have the identity of the beneficiary. Somebody dies and the bank doesn't do anything to locate those beneficiaries to turn that money over? Am I hearing that right?
We don't have their identifying information. We have like their date of birth
And their name.
and their name. That's all.
And their
we have.
relationship to you.
Okay, so completely passive position on the bank's part. The reason I asked, I just had a sister die, way over on the East Coast, left no any directives, anything.
Mhm.
And in this modern era, I don't know about you,
Mhm.
ever since COVID hit, I live part of the year in 2 different states. So there's that complexity. And then, I'm just noticing that our lives are not so simple as maybe they were once, with living in multiple regions at different seasons of the year
Exactly.
and interstate. And in that moment, you open up a bank account, you're not necessarily thinking, you're asked to fill in that line, you do it, and maybe that changes over time or whatever. But I'm just surprised to hear that no steps are, and because maybe at the moment you open an account, you're just thinking of that years later.
If it's somebody we know, like it's a mutual customer, we would reach out to them.
Well,
But if it's somebody like in Alaska or Arizona, we're not gonna have any methods to contact them. Yeah.
And the reality is
Yeah.
that, like, in my case, I've been coming to the Met Health for 10 years seasonally before COVID hit and said, socially distance.
Yeah.
Where's the best place to socially distance? Right here, right?
Uh-huh.
Miles between neighbors, et cetera. So I'm saying the situations change and all that kind of thing, and I'm just kind of surprised to hear. That money could go down the black hole and never reach.
It goes to the school.
Oh, okay.
Let me clarify something from what you said, and that is that, you have a state of residence, and even though you might live other places, there's one state that is legally your residence, and there's a lot of factors that go into identifying which is your residence. And one of them is, where do you vote? Where do you spend most of your time? Where do you own property? And there's like 6 or 7, things that where your driver's license is, and that is your residence, and that's where you should do your will. And if you have property in other states, then your personal representative has to open what's called an ancillary probate. They have to go to that state and open a probate in that state to get access to your assets, because the personal representative has to gather all your assets, pay all your debts, and distribute it to your beneficiaries in your will. So that's how that works.
Ancillary probate.
Ancillary probate. So your personal representative in your state would have to pay for probates in however many states you have stuff.
Because, I had a follow-on question to that. It's like, I wouldn't have ever thought it was the responsibility of a bank or financial institution to find that beneficiary. Silly me, I was the personal representative, we called it executors back in the day, of someone's estate. I heard that was my job to find Joe Blow and
It is.
wherever he was.
It is the person, that's their job.
So it's not like there's not some effort put toward finding missing or hard to find people before it defaults.
Yeah, a good personal representative would think, did they have an account? Usually someone dies and the personal representative, this happened 2 days ago in my office, they're gonna go to the house and they're gonna look through all the papers and they're gonna find all the debts and they're gonna find all the statements from banks and whatever. And so they have to do some investigative work to figure out, where everything is. And, things could fall through the holes, the cracks, but that's their job to find it. Yeah.
And if there is no personal representative named,
Uh-huh.
then does the court assign a personal representative or an executor
Yeah.
of the person's estate?
Right, the spouse has first priority, and then someone can come forward and say, we have this will, but the personal representative has died, the alternate personal representative has died, and so they go to the court and say, but I want to be the personal representative, and they have to show that they're 18 and they're competent and they have to sign an oath of a personal representative to say that they will do things according to the law, and they have a fiduciary duty to the estate. And so that's what happens. You go to court and someone comes forward and says, I want to be the personal representative. Otherwise, I don't know. I mean, otherwise all this stuff just sits there, I guess.
The court does not assign someone to function in that role unless somebody comes forward.
Yeah, somebody comes forward. I mean, a lawyer could come forward and say, I know this person died, this person doesn't have any. And that's what happened to me when the Department of Revenue called me and said, would you take over this estate? Because there was money and there was property, but there wasn't anyone, there was no will, and there was no relatives. And so I came forward and made myself the personal representative, and then I took care of it.
I will say that as we watch people go through end-of-life processes, what is very clear is that if you don't plan, you have no choice about what happens. And that is really what we're hoping you all will consider at this point, is that by addressing the issues that are raised here, you have the opportunity to have some control over what happens to your passwords.
Let me also say this. I always tell my clients, it's a gift to your family to get it organized.
And your friends.
And your friends, so that's a good thing to think about.
So get your ducks in a row.
We just found out that we had